So thanks for coming down. I'm Mark Heley, and I'm going to be doing a presentation I'm calling 2012 Paradigm Shift. So to begin with, perhaps we could just, 2012, does that conjure up any particular images or ideas with people here? What does 2012 mean to you?
End of the Mayan calendar.
End of the Mayan calendar?
So Terence McKenna's end points.
Yeah, Terence and his time wave zero ending on the same day as the Mayan calendar ends. Any other ideas?
Obviously, there's all the doom and gloom prophecies.
Lots of emergencies going past potentially. Or lots of concerns that's what it might be.
So it's interesting. It's just a date, but there's this really strong kind of emotional complex that's built up around it. So the goal of this talk really is to sort of go into why 2012 matters and hopefully explain it in a way which allows you to kind of really see what is going on with it. And the idea that I'm going to be presenting tonight is that there is something going on, and it's a fundamental change. And I'm going to hopefully get to the point where I can show you what I think is changing and from what into what. So to begin with, why 2012 matters, why this date is important. So it really has to do with the Maya. And the Maya are a culture which have lived in this area of Central America for several thousand years, and their culture went through a kind of florescent phase where they were really reached really quite remarkable heights. They were building temples, they were building pyramids, and this kind of like peaked between about 300 AD and 900 AD. Now, the Maya themselves still live in these areas. There is an indigenous culture. They're living in a traditional way, and there are concentrations of Maya living in their indigenous culture still, especially around Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. They've been through a lot of persecution. It's not been, like most indigenous cultures, an easy ride for them since the European invasion. This is basically where the Maya calendar comes from. So this is a couple of examples of the Mayan architecture. On the left we have this palace, or it's basically a large building in the city of Palenque in Chiapas. This is actually surrounded by many pyramids. Some of them really beautiful ones, like the Temple of Inscriptions. But this building, the palace, which is right at the centre, is actually not a palace at all. This is an astronomical observatory. And this actually opened to the air, and in the centre of these colonnades, there was large pools of water, large rectangular pools. And what the Maya were doing is they were using these pools of water for astronomical observations. So instead of looking up at the stars, what they'd do is they'd actually look down at stars reflected in the water. And that gave them the advantage, basically, of being able to make very accurate measurements of where the planets were and the relative positions of stars and lots of other things. So as you can see, this is a culture that's really interested in what's going on in the sky, to the point where really they're putting this building right at the centre of a really significant temple complex. On the right-hand side, we have the Pyramid of the Jaguar in Tikal, which is down in Guatemala. And again, a really remarkable example of the Mayan culture. Very steep sloped pyramid. And these centres, these not generally used for habitation, these were actually ceremonial sites. So what was going on here was basically a series of ceremonies, mythological reenactments and other things. So this wasn't like an urban centre as we know it. It's not like a shopping complex or anything like that. It's basically a ceremonial centre. I mean, you could make a parallel between, say, Avebury in our country or the pyramids of Egypt as well. So that's just to show you, like what the architecture looks like. Now, the idea of the Maya calendar might be that, when you think about the Maya, well, why should we care about the Maya? Well, we're living in the 21st century, and we have a very advanced technological culture, and these people were living in Central America, and they didn't even invent the wheel. And, well, they kind of did, but then they used it for children's toys. So, what relevance is it? This is like a local calendar of a kind of like, a provincial people. Well, as I showed in the last slide, this was a culture that was really, really obsessed with what's going on in the stars, especially, and very, very interested in the relationships of what we call astronomy. And one of the reasons, we should take a good look at this whole system is because it's actually a really beautiful and elegant mathematical system, and one that we can learn from. It's actually the simplest number system ever devised. It only has 3 symbols. The first symbol is this shell for 0, and the Maya had a concept of 0. We took it from the Arabic culture, and previously they borrowed it from the Indians. But at the time that they were using this idea of 0, we were using the Roman number system, which doesn't even have that concept. So how it works is really simple. Dot for 1, 2 dots for 2, 3 dots for 3, and 4 dots for 4. And when you get 5, there's a bar. So you just progress in a similar way with a dot above the bar for 6, 2 dots above the bar for 7, 3 for 8, 4 for 9, and then 2 bars for 10. So as you can see, it actually goes up to 19, which is 3 bars and 4 dots. And that's because the Maya were actually using a different base to their mathematical system. What we use is base 10, so you can think of that as counting on your fingers. But the Maya were actually using base 20, which is like counting on your fingers and toes. And that is a really significant thing. It's one of the reasons that the Mayan calendrical system really matters. And, for example, contemporary scientists have shown that mathematical ability in children is related to the way that the language of number is constructed. So, for instance, there was a study to try and find out why Asian kids do generally better than Western kids in maths. And one of the reasons they found was actually that the names for numbers in Chinese are really short. They're 2 or 3 letters, whereas we have long words like 8. And just really small differences can mean really different kind of sort of like knock-on ability for mathematical prowess. So what you've got here is you've got a base 20 system which is really good at handling big numbers. So our number system goes 10, 100, 1,000, whereas this one goes 20 to 400 and onwards. So it allowed the Maya to be very, very flexible with big numbers. So they were able to see bigger cycles than are immediately obvious to us. So this is actually just another way of showing the same thing. And these glyphs, or pictograms, symbols, are basically the core component of the Mayan calendrical system. And what you're seeing is basically exactly the same as on the previous slide, which is basically a base 20 counting system. So it starts here with alligator, and it goes on to wind, house, seed, next one is serpent, death, and rabbits. Moon, dog, monkey, road, then we've got reed, jaguar, eagle, warrior, earth, mirror, storm, and sun. And when you reach sun, it goes back to the beginning again. So it's a repeating cycle, a 20-day cycle, which is at the core of this calendrical system. And what's different about this, again, from the system that we use, is that each day has an energy. It's not just a quantity, there's a quality of time. So, for instance, today is actually a monkey day, 7 monkey in the traditional Mayan calendar. And the monkey has a particular energy, so it's good for work. It's also quite mischievous as well. So they're attributing qualities to time as well as quantities, which is something that I think is actually really relevant. I'll come back to in a moment. So this is how the core of the system works, and there are lots of different calendars that they were kind of expanding out into, but this is basically the sort of the central system. And the next level of it the only level we're really going to look at in depth today is it's called the Zalkin. And this basically is just the 20 glyphs that we previously saw in the previous slide in a column here. So starting with alligator at the top and going down to sun. But this time there are 13 different permutations of each of those 20 signs. So basically how this matrix works is that it's another repeating cycle. It begins at the top left-hand corner and then it goes down this column of 1 up to 13. And then it begins again at 1 and continues to 13. So this pattern is repeated until you get a matrix of 260 days, and then basically it repeats again. So it's very different from the calendar that we're using today in the West, which is really, we've got a day, obviously, that's an obvious thing in common, but we're really fascinated by the year, which obviously is another astronomical cycle. But it's the day and the year are the only astronomical cycles that we're actually tracking in the West, which is quite peculiar in a lot of ways. We use the word month to describe this division of 12 parts of the year, which comes from the Old English word the moon. So there's kind of a vestige of tracking the cycles of the moon in our calendrical system, but it's a very different way of looking at time. So, I mean, does anyone know what the name of our calendar is?
Gregorian.
The Gregorian calendar. Why is it called the Gregorian calendar?
It was invented during Gregorian times, to my knowledge.
Yeah, it was basically, it's called the Gregorian calendar because it was actually reformed. It was previously existing. It was the Roman calendar before that. And Pope Gregory XIII, there was this drift happening in the calendar where the festival of Easter was moving in a way that was basically like they weren't really happy about. It wasn't particularly accurate. So during his reign, he basically like fiddled with it a little bit and tuned it up. So what we're actually seeing is that far from being some sort of scientific discovery, our calendar is kind of rooted in something else. And what that something else is actually the Roman Catholic belief system, and previous to that, the Roman belief system. And the Romans were good at many things, but one of the things they weren't particularly good at was astronomy, or observing what's actually happening in the sky. So the original estimation the Romans had of how long a year was about 355 days, which is very, very far from the mark. In fact, it really kind of shows they weren't really paying that much attention, because if you go out and observe the cycles of nature, as the people that built the megalithic temples in this country were, and the Maya were, you find out pretty soon that it's about 365 and a bit days. It's not that difficult. So somehow this calendar, which was started out with 10 divisions of the year, has become the world's global timing standard. It's quite an unusual story. It's something a lot of people don't think about too much, because we're actually often just within the context of the calendar, so it can be quite difficult to see that actually this is an arbitrary thing. This is not like science. This is something that a group of people make up. So it's a very different idea about time than the Maya had, because this particular system is really the product of a culture that was observing the cycles of natural time, that was basically interested in what was going on in the sky and the seasons and with the planets. So, you contrast and compare it here, and you've got this as the kind of like core module of the Mayan way of thinking about time. And in our culture, we've got this very irregular kind of calendar, which is divided into 12 months, but the number of days in the month doesn't actually, it's not a regular thing. It kind of like chops and changes with no kind of harmony or particular reason. There are other, very illogical things about it. Like, for instance, we're now in September. What does September mean? Anyone know?
7 something.
Yeah, I think it's the 7th month, but strangely enough, it's actually the 9th month. It's like that's irrational, basically. So why is that? And the reason is because Julius Caesar, who was the reformer of the previous calendar, when the Julian reforms happened, he said, well, I'd like a month, please. And really, no one could refuse him, so hence we have July in the middle of the calendar. then Augustus came along, and he said, well, if it's good enough for Julius, I want one too. So, hence, we have August. And that means because they stuck 2 months in the middle of the year, that we have 12 months, and what was previously the 7th month is actually the 9th. So you're getting more of a kind of picture of where we're at. You know, this is the system that if you are in China and you want to do business, you're going to have to use, because everyone else is using it. If you're in India and you want to do business, you're going to have to use the Gregorian calendar, because everyone else is using this system. So it's a very strange situation on this planet at the moment, where we've got a calendar which isn't based on, you know, scientific rationale, that isn't even logical, and reflects basically the cultural belief system of one segment of humanity, not the whole of humanity. So why is that important? You know, it's just a calendar. You know, who cares? I mean, you know, that's you know, how relevant is that? Well, the calendar is basically the master coordinating system for how we actually conduct everything. You know, it's basically how we organise society. So when we have a calendar which is irrational and doesn't actually reflect the cycles of nature, the product is basically like having software which is glitchy, and you're building on that. It's like the operating system of the society. And the trouble is once you've got that system going, it's really difficult to get the momentum to change it. There was actually a big push in the 1930s for the League of Nations to reform the world's calendar. And they sat down and they decided, yeah, we'll have 13 moons and 28 days each and 1 day at the end, which is the day out time. That's basically, the accountants wanted it because it divides the year into half, into quarters, and there's exactly 52 weeks a year, and there's lots of other good reasons. But voted for by all the nations of the world, and what happened after that was that the Vatican came along and said, well, we're not having this because it breaks the cycle of creation, which is basically a Christian myth. So that's kind of where we're at. Now, this is a really special kind of thing because, you know, in a way, why 260? You know, what's that got to do with anything? It's not, you know, there's the day, but it's not an exact number of moons, and 260 days isn't a year. Well, it's because of this. This is basically an astronomical master calendar. And what you have on the side here are basically these amazing coincidences between this 260-day cycle and other cycles of nature. So, you know, is it a coincidence or is it actually a kind of like harmonic principle that we've discovered here? Because if you take 3 Zolkins, that's 780 days, 3 times 260, that's 1 Martian synodic year. 4 Zolkins equals 3 eclipse years. And then you find all these amazing whole number correlations. 46 Zolkins is 405 lunar months. 59 is 42 tropical years. So you've got the moon, you've got the eclipse cycle, you've got the Martian cycles, and you can even scale it up, you know, to looking at like Jupiter years. 88 Jupiter synodic years, exactly 135 Zolkins, and 137 Zolkins equals 61 Venus synodic years. So this is a remarkable thing because what you've got in this calendar system is you've basically got a way of bringing together in harmony all the different cycles that we actually see when we observe the cycles of natural time. It's not just about the day and the year, which is what we're tracking, but they're basically tracking the Moon, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, all the visible planets. And they're basically able to coordinate them into a form of harmony that is really quite complex and quite special. It's effectively an unparalleled calendrical system on this planet. And what this actually is showing here is a Mayan inscription for December 21st, 2012. So this actually is what, if you were to draw out what all the different layers of the calendar are actually expressing, this inscription is basically saying December 21st, 2012. So here you've got the sun symbol, number 4 next to it. And you've got various different other symbols here, one for the moon and other much bigger cycles of time. Won't really go into like those at the moment because the mind political system is like it's got a lot of complexity and a lot of depth in it. But basically, the big cycle that we're talking about, and unfortunately this is kind of obscured by this black background, is a cycle of 5,125 years. So when we're saying that the Maya calendar is coming to an end on December 21st, 2012, what we're talking about is actually there is a 5,125 year cycle which is reaching its completion. Now this is called the 13th Baktun cycle, and it began, just about see on the top there, began August 11th, 3114 BC, and it finishes on December 21st, 2012. So this is basically what we're talking about. Now, this is so much more of an advanced calendar system that I suggest that like if we found one of these on the moon, we'd be studying this as if it were an extraterrestrial civilization, because it's more advanced than the planet, and that's something that I think that really jumps out about this. And yet the way that we view it is basically through our own cultural lens, and because we think of ourselves as being advanced, as being technological, as being sophisticated, and on the edge of time moving forward, we fail to see that actually this culture is doing something that's actually more complex than we are doing ourselves. So one of the great things about the Mayan calendrical system and why 2012 matters is that it's actually bringing us to awareness about the context that we're inhabiting and how we actually are perceiving time and how much of that is actually a cultural artifact. This is not about, it's like there are scientists going to work on Monday morning to discover the nature of time that never question why they go to work on Monday morning. Why is everyone stuck in a traffic jam going to work at all at the same time? These are arbitrary cultural conventions, and yet they shape the view that we have of the universe. So our notion of time has become dominated by something called the myth of progress, which is the idea that time is a linear arrow moving forward, and that it basically continues to do so 1 year per year towards some sort of infinite horizon. Well, that is really different from how the Mayans saw it, because if you look at nature, what you see is cycles and completions and new beginnings. So it's not a surprise that by using a calendar that is based on the idea of time moving forward in a linear way, what we've actually done is become deeply out of tune with the bigger cycles of nature. That's the kind of the basis of the Mayan calendrical system. It's you can expand upon it in depth, and it's still a really dynamic area of research and discovery. There's lots of stuff that we're discovering that is really interesting. But one of the kind of things which has happened with this system is that there's been kind of like some very interesting, effectively like new Age interpretations of this. And this is a diagram which is basically a representation of one of the very first ones, which is from the work of Jose Arguelles, a book called The Mind Factor, and this is in 1987. And the idea that Jose had was that, okay, you've got this cycle which begins at 31,114 BC, and it ends in December 2012. So, is it a remarkable coincidence that at 31,14 BC, you've basically got the beginning of civilizations occurring. You've got ancient Sumeria, you've got the very beginnings of the Egyptian early kingdoms, and that's when we begin to see monuments and other things appearing, generally speaking. Of course there's other things, but that's a really remarkable coincidence. So what he did is he basically thought, well, perhaps this cycle is like we can see this